Thank you. So we've talked about all the issues that exist in our city. So we have a housing crisis, we have failing schools. But what I would love to hear are what are some of your ideas? Because we do want to see more development in the city, but we also know that we have to analyze our TSA. However, part of the issue is that we have one of the highest commercial tax rates in the country at 36.7%. And our real estate taxes, if you're not exempt, it's pretty significant as well. So what are some of your ideas to figure out how do we balance the cost burden so that the taxes are, or the tax burden is not necessarily on the residents, but there's a way that we can attract more development into the city? Because in order for us to create affordable housing, we need funds. And the problem is, because of the cost of developing affordable housing, most developers won't do it because there isn't enough return in their investment. So what are some ways that we can think of to increase our tax base so that we can have additional resources that could go to our schools, that could go into our city services, and also to repair our roads? Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Nick.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your question, Councilwoman. For starters, I'd like to start with institutional taxation. You know, it seems to me for the longest time that large institutions like Brown University, Johnson & Wales, RISD, and the hospitals were in a position to be the biggest players in town and to buy up property at what is an inflated market rate. In other words, that they were paying more than the rest of the real estate market was willing to pay. As a result, they took a lot of those properties off of the tax rolls. Now, when they do that, so first off, I don't like that at all. I'll work on a solution for you in a second, but I just want to say that the whole system of making these institutions tax exempt was to allow them to compete in a capitalist market playing field. It was not to allow them to dominate it, and that's essentially what's been happening. So what I find particularly troublesome, not that you knock down a building or you buy a property and you turn it into a classroom or a laboratory. I think that should be perfectly reasonable and protected, exempt activity. But I do find it problematic where there's a lot of crossover between what is a tenant and lessee situation and what is actually serving the primary purpose of the universities. So there's a lot of those properties that come off and they turn into off-campus housing for students. And those properties, because it fits close enough to their exemption, are not on the tax roll. So I believe we should be looking through all these different properties that are ancillary activities for the institutions and find a way to tax them.
So to speak on that issue, again, I've got a 40-page report that looks really deeply into this issue. Brown University owns $1.7 billion in total assessment. Let's put that in perspective. Our schools are crumbling. That means that we're not raising enough municipal revenue to be reinvesting into our children in our schools. By virtue of living in Ward 1, you know whose property taxes are higher because Brown is on that property? Yours. So we're on the hook for that. Now, Brown contributes around $6.2 million to the city every year. They've got a memorandum of understanding that suggests that they should pay $2 million a year to the city. Now, this is a very complicated issue. I'm a Brown alum. I love the institution dearly. But we have to really question, is Brown paying their fair share? And I think that requires a conversation amongst everyone in this room. Because quite frankly, if you look at taxes, what's happening, especially with this recent progressive multi-tiered scenario, they're trying to shift more tax burden onto average taxpayers. That's not the way that you solve this issue. If you look at models all across the country, folks are looking at things like circuit breakers, where you can provide exemptions for folks who are at a certain income level. And that helps mitigate the risk for some of the most vulnerable amongst us. I think we've got to really enhance constituent transparency and visibility by being, again, fully transparent about any proposed property tax changes and work with legislators to figure out alternative solutions to generate enough municipal revenue to mitigate the risks and burdens on all communities. I mean, who doesn't want lower property taxes? We all want lower property taxes. And the way that we accomplish that is not by shifting more burden onto the east side or Ward 1. The way that we look at that is by studying things like TSAs and really evaluating TSAs. And then another thing is looking at our non-exempt institutions, Brown being one of them. $1.7 billion in total assessments, and we can rightfully say $0 in property taxes. But Brown isn't the only person or only institution that we ought to think about. I think about other non-exempt institutions as well. Is PC paying their fair share to the city of Providence? Again, Brown owns 176 buildings or more in our city. And that has implications on our tax roll. If we really want to be investing in our public education, we ought to really look at the entire system, and we have to look at that in a very nuanced way. I'm not making a hardline stance here. I love Brown University. It's a great institution that I've benefited from tremendously. But we need to study this issue and figure out how we can allow everyone in our city to flourish and thrive.
Okay, thanks, John. Quick answer.
Okay, quick answer is, first, John and Nick have done a much better job of thanking everyone for their question than I have done. But I am kind of a polite person, so I'd like to add in, at least at this late date. So, thank you, Councilwoman La Fortune. There's some agreement here, I'm going to leave here. I think it's, those days are over. We do have to re-examine nonprofits, whether it's Brown, whether it's Johnson & Wales, whether it's any other nonprofit, not-for-profit, which are, by the way, in my opinion, all for profit. Everyone's for profit. You need these profits in order to do anything you want to do. We have to make sure that when I'm on that side of the aisle, and you and I get together and we want to buy a property here, and we want to open a small business and work 7 days a week, we cannot compete with someone who is not going to ever pay taxes. They will outbid us every time. So we have to combine the idea of finding a way to tax the people that haven't been taxed. You're very welcome. Those days are over. We're going to move forward now. We're glad you have it. Maybe not tax them at 100% right out of the gate. Maybe we have a graduated tax on it. We start with 25. Each time you buy a new building, we have a way to bring it forward. So we get some real revenue we can think of and calculate that is going to come if it's purchased by a nonprofit. We also allow the small business owner to now buy that building or buy that property or buy that land and develop something who's going to pay full-on taxes. I'd love to see some kind of TSAs for that small business owner who has a 5% margin of taking anything home after working 40 hours. When sometimes you calculate it, sometimes a small business owner can be making less than minimum wage.